My name's Emily, and in this video I'll be suggesting 5 paintings that are good for a newer artist. These painting suggestions aren't meant to be activities that are 30 minutes to an hour to complete, but they're paintings that are meant to build an artist's skill set. All 5 of my suggestions are going to have 2 things in common. 1, that they're going to be done on a canvas that is at least 11 by 14, if not larger. When you work on a smaller canvas, every stroke matters, and sometimes when you're beginning, that can be very frustrating. Secondly, I suggest not doing any human beings for these paintings. Humans are very difficult, and at this stage where someone's building their skill set, it's more important to get the fundamentals down than to tackle something that could be overly frustrating. There are a lot of YouTube videos out there that will show you how to paint a tree in 30 minutes or in an hour, and you'll have this finished painting. I disagree with it because the underpainting process and all of that will take multiple hours to do to finally get it done. But you go away from that painting having more skills and having a better done tree. You can see the difference in the work people make. And that's one of the reasons why these quick 30-minute paintings, hour-long paintings, look so weird and kind of flat and strange, because none of that work was taken into it. It was all just trying to get the fastest thing done. With that being said, let me get into the suggestions. Suggestion number 1, still life in a well-lit room. When I was younger, I really dreaded having to do still lifes. The teachers would have us do a bowl of fruit. I just really wasn't interested in it. I wanted to draw dragons, something really fun. Well, now that I've got more experience, I can see why we were doing still lifes, and I don't know if it wasn't explained to me properly or if it wasn't entirely taught properly until I had a mentor. So still lifes are good for multiple reasons. 1, you can control the lighting, and 2, you have simple subject matter. But there's an even bigger, more important lesson that needs to be learned there, which is your shadow system, or at least that's what my mentor called it. This is a technique that is also called your underpainting, or your dead painting, or your dead layers. Basically what you need to know is it's a very traditional way of doing your shadows first before you paint anything else. This is helpful because, for 1, you've plotted out your shadows. You'd be surprised how many paintings I've seen where shadows are just going in different directions because it wasn't planned out. In different schools of thought, you cover this over entirely by the end of your painting. My style for underpainting or doing shadow systems is imprimatura. Usually my shadow system or my underpainting is done with an ultramarine blue or a burnt umber or a raw umber, and that's because I lean more on an impressionistic palette. There are schools of thought that also will do this in greens or grays. It just depends upon what your preference is, and you may come to develop that with practicing your painting like you would with a still life. At this stage, as a beginning artist, you're learning how you want to do your underpainting and what colors work. So you could try different techniques on this painting. You don't have to do one painting all one way and one painting all another way. You could in fact do 5 apples and have each one done a different way. You'll begin to develop a sense of what kind of underpainting you prefer, and you'll even be able to switch up your underpainting techniques based upon what it is you're painting. But here, for this first still life with bright light, you won't have a lot of shadows, so it'll be easy just to apply a little bit here and there and really work with the light. And that's what's going to lead me to my second suggestion. Suggestion number 2, still life, heavy shadows. For all the reasons that I listed in my first suggestion, this is a repeat of it. This time the shadows are going to be more intense and there's going to be more of them. The most important thing that a new artist can do is to pay as much attention as they can to their subject matter. Artists tend to make assumptions about their subject matter. They'll say, well, this shadow is all black, so I'm just going to shade it in all black. And there's a lot of flatness there. When in fact, light behaves as a wave and a particle, so it's always bouncing around. There's a lot going on with the shadows, which is why it's important to map it out and to have a shadow system or an underpainting done. Because paying attention to your subject matter and making sure you're painting what's really there is very important. If you look at this example again, you'll see that there's the shadow, the cast shadow, and then there's at the bottom part, the accent. Now, I've taught classes where I've put a ball down and I've put a light on it and I've asked people to draw it. And most of the time, they miss the accent. They miss the fact that the light's bouncing around because their mind is assuming that it's all going to be shadow. By paying real close attention to what's actually going on around us, you can give your paintings and your drawings that nuance that really makes it beautiful. My first 2 suggestions are still lifes with a fixed light point so that you're not having to work on the sun's schedule. You can take your time as a beginner, but you're really working on your underpainting. You're really working on mapping out your painting so that when you go on to more complex media, more complex subject matter, you'll do fine. You won't be frustrated and you won't realize that you spent 20 hours on a painting just to realize that you missed a shadow or that your lack of your shadows being sophisticated made your work go flat. Now it's time to move on to my third suggestion. Suggestion number 3, a landscape grid method with perspective. In some of my other videos, I've talked about the grid method, but in case you haven't seen those or you don't know what I'm talking about, the grid method is whereby an artist divides up their canvas like a grid, and they divide up the image that they're looking at with the grid, and then they transpose that image block by block onto their canvas. This is a good method for when you have complicated subject matter and you're working from an image. I'll throw in the caveat that I do everywhere, which is to be careful about the images that you choose. If you're just doing this for yourself and you're not trying to sell it, then you don't have to worry about taking someone's copyrighted photography. But if you are trying to sell it, you might want to try to stick to using your own photos or using copyright-free photos. The reason I suggest using the grid method for this piece is just for the beginning artist to get practice with a subject matter that isn't too difficult. I suggest starting off with an image like this. In this image, there's perspective, there is a foreground, and there's a background. One of the tendencies with newer artists I've noticed is that they will want to paint everything with a one-point perspective. The theory as to why a lot of newer artists do this is because they're painting the world as they see it, which is when they look at someone, they're immediately just looking at them. They're not looking up at them or necessarily from a different angle. Changing your perspective is going to be a powerful way to create interest in your work. And this is a good way to begin trying to incorporate perspective. The painting here would be fairly simple. You wouldn't go into a lot of detail. You would still want to work with doing your underpainting, your layering, your dead layering, however you want to word it. For me, I tend to say shadow system because that's what my mentor said. But this is another opportunity. It's practicing both the grid method and perspective while also, again, staying away from using humans as your subject matter. One of the details about the grid method that I didn't cover in my previous videos was how many squares an artist should use. And the answer to that is that it depends. An artist may be comfortable using lots of squares or only using a few. They may feel that they only need to divide it up into 6 large squares, or they want to have a lot. I will tend to, with more complicated subject matters, put in more squares because I know I'm going to need to make it that much more detailed to get the painting right. And with other ones, I may do larger squares because I just want to kind of ballpark where certain things are and make sure I don't get off track. So this is also a chance for newer artists by doing this painting to get a sense for how many squares they need. They may find that they put in too many or they didn't put in enough, but that's why this is a good painting for a beginner to do and why especially using the grid method for this is good. With all that being said, it leads me into my fourth suggestion. Suggestion 4, buildings, grid method with perspective. As I mentioned in my previous suggestion, this is a good opportunity for a beginning artist to start trying to use the grid method to see how they like it. The reason why I wanted to throw in buildings and architecture is because they can tend to trick artists, both experienced and amateur alike. One of the difficulties in painting buildings or working with architecture is it's just like the shadows on that ball, where we have an idea of what things should look like, but we're not actually looking at reality. And so sometimes you would be surprised at when you see a building that a line is actually going up instead of going down. So it's really good practice to actually have a building and to get some experience working with it. This is also a really great opportunity for an artist to use a ruler and the grid method, as well as still doing the underpainting techniques as well. Working from photos is helpful again in this situation because you're not having to deal with the sun. Dealing with the sun is something that will come in later, especially if you decide that you're going to take a more traditional route and paint directly from your subject matter. When you're painting out in nature and you're dealing with the sun, you have a whole new set of challenges. And at the beginning, that may not be the time to take on those challenges. You'll have plenty of time to take them on later. Now it's time to move on to my final suggestion. Suggestion number 5. Try to make a copy of a painting you like. For a lot of artists, they don't like this suggestion because there's a lot of pressure to be unique. But in fact, this is a really tried and true method of learning. Back in the day with Michelangelo, Raphael and them, this would be how they would learn. They would not just have a mentor who would help them, but they would also be expected to try to copy art from the people that had gone before them. The idea is that in an effort to copy somebody, you pay so much attention to their painting, more than you might on a cursory glance or more than you might in just thinking. If it's an artist you respect, they may not be alive or they may not be able to mentor you, but you can still learn from their work. It's going to take a lot of study to try to figure out, how did they make the skin look like that? How did they make the shadow look like that? What did they do? This is a study. This is how you are going to figure out what it was that someone you liked did that made that painting. One thing that a lot of people don't realize about the old masters was that very often they would farm out the smaller pieces of their paintings to the people that were learning underneath them. So you would see perhaps a Raphael with a background or a Leonardo da Vinci with a background piece. And what would happen is the people that were studying underneath them, their apprentices, would paint that background bit. And they were more interested in the foreground, the nuances, and the big punch of the piece. We tend to think in our modern era that an artist has done 100% of their work. This was not the expectation back in the day, nor was it the reality. So don't feel bad, don't feel like it's wrong to take a painting from someone that you like and attempt to copy it. You're going to find that it's a lot harder than you think it is, but also you're going to enjoy getting to get closer to that artist that you respect. If you're a big fan of Van Gogh and you attempt to copy his Starry Night, people are going to know that that's what you did. But when you do that and you're really looking at his painting and just trying to get down exactly how he did it, you're going to uncover so many of his little secrets. As a beginner or somebody who may not have studied art in a more academic sense or a more professional sense, you might say that you don't know what artists you like. I have linked below a list of 20 famous artists. Again, some of these are going to have people in them. I don't suggest starting off with people at this stage, but it will give you an idea of, well, maybe you like Impressionism, maybe you like Cubism, and so you can try to develop it. And also, it doesn't have to be a big famous artist. It can just be any painting that you find online that you like. You can Google blue flowers, and if a blue flower that you really enjoy comes up, just try to copy it. Just look for a painting that you enjoy, and then take the time to study it and figure out that person's technique. You can use the grid method. I highly suggest almost every painting having an underpainting or dead layering. It is a traditional and ethical way to learn, so long as you cite your source material when anybody asks. I wouldn't attempt to sell those types of pieces. Again, these are 5 suggestions for beginning artists that are about building your skill set so that you can start creating the works that you want now that you've learned some of the techniques you'll need in order to get there. I didn't go into it too much in the beginning, but I don't really agree with a lot of the YouTube videos that are, oh, paint a tree here, paint a sky there. They completely skip the underpainting process. And that's why all those paintings look kind of weird. To me, it's sort of the fast food of art. You didn't take the time to do the underpainting. You didn't take the time to really develop the piece, and it really shows in the end product. I had originally thought about doing this video on how to make this painting in 30 minutes, how to make this painting in an hour, because I believe that those are the type of videos that people want to click on and they want to get something done fast and quick. But I don't believe that I'm doing a service to other artists by doing it that way. So this is actually the way to build your skill set. This is actually the way to become a better artist and to take on more complicated projects with less frustration. I do think that my next video, I may talk more about the underpainting process and go into that, because that is the piece of the puzzle that seems to be missing from a lot of these painting videos that I see. And that frustrates me a little bit, because I'm sure that the people who are painting can tell that their painting doesn't look like what they're wanting to do, but they don't know why. If a painter is taught well, they should have a mental toolbox full of what they need to get their painting done. If you're having difficulty with a certain part of your painting, you can say, oh, I need to do the grid method. Oh, I need more squares in my grid. Oh, I'm having trouble with the shadows. I need to pay a lot more attention. Did I do my shadow system? That kind of thing. For me, I want to equip other artists with meaningful tools to get the job done and for their paintings to look great. I don't want to give them really cheap Kraft macaroni and cheese, which is delicious, but not nutritious and not good for your overall well-being as an artist. If you're a beginning artist and you tried any of these suggestions, I'd like for you to leave a comment down below. If you're an experienced artist and you wanted to add any other suggestions to this, I'd like to hear what you have to say. And for everyone that watched, thank you for watching.